Liu Zhang, a Chinese Korean director, whose new film, The Shadowless Tower, we just saw at Berlin. And you've been looking at Liu Zhang's career from Tang Poetry, his debut, to and then Grain in Ear.
His second film. I've zanged quite deeply. I've zigged and zanged basically. I mean, I think I think in order to talk about Shadowless Tower, it's important to set the stage a little bit with his early filmmaking. He's an ethnically Korean filmmaker whose family moved to China. That kind of ethnic minority occupies a very strained place in Chinese society in terms of integration. I think that what I love about Tang Poetry and about Grain and Ear is they're both deeply, very restrained films in the kind of tradition of maybe Hu Shaoshen and early
aesthetical to an extent, or maybe even Ulrich Seidel was coming to mind when I was watching.
Yeah. There's a kind of plein air, kind of available light, sort of
tripod.
Very static. And I think what works really well with his early films is their restraint and I suppose their kind of mannered artificiality, and the way in his early films you get intrusions of pop music, karaoke music, actual Li Bai, like actual Tang Dynasty era poetry into these very drab, denuded, often rural or kind of shabby industrial spaces. This film, I think in a lot of ways that lean Liu Zhang has been on the bloat a bit, and it's been at the buffet, and I think has kind of bloated to attach all these other gewgaws to itself. So the very tight, very lean, very strained and very odd Liu Zhang of 20 years ago, of like 2002, 2003, 2004. He kind of transitions slowly.
Could you give us a brief summary of this film, of what happens?
Yeah, so Shadowless Tower is basically set mostly in Beijing. It gravitates around a food writer, a sort of Jay Rayner, a Chinese Jay Rayner. Who and his kind of photography partner, as it were, a young kind of manic pixie dream photographer. And
younger lady.
Yeah, much younger lady. And from there, it's very hard. It basically explores a series of strands of longing and absence and family. He has a kind of estranged father who abandoned them many, many years ago in public shame from the family for allegedly groping a woman on a bus. There are lots of he has an ex-wife, a daughter with the ex-wife, and his ex-wife is dying of cancer, it turns out. His best friend from university kills himself during the film. So there's lots of these different tangents, and again, I think what works, the leanness of a film like Grain and Ear, which is merely about this mother trying to bring up her son and suffering the injustices of and privations of poverty in this kind of industrial town, shabby industrial town. Here, it goes all in with these multiple different tessellating arcs, story arcs, basically, one of which would have sufficed, perhaps. Again, this is one of those films that, for me at least, was okay, but and therefore you can see the outline of better and or more contained films within. It's a very long 2.5 hours, and it's, I think, the kind of formal restraint and formal rigor of his early cinema. Which when I wrote my piece about it last week on my Substack, I kind of alluded to being kind of, actually in a way, Jean Dalman-esque, so Ackermanic, and also a bit Godardian in its effect. This is kind of lapsed.
So this about Grain and Ear.
Grain and Ear and Tang Poetry, yeah. I think that those things have lapsed and given way to something that is, I think, much more singing from the hymn sheet of contemporary Asian art house, middlebrow cinema. It's got Drive My Car, valences. It's got a lot of kind of contemporary Park Chan-wook, or it's got elements, you know, sort of Decision to Leave vibes about it. It's a much more mobile camera. It's the
generally more conventional compositions.
More conventional compositions. A lot more saccharine, I think. It kind of goes, it tries to play, well, no, I've been talking about it for ages, and I'm kind of curious because I know you were making notes during this while I was
yeah, I mean, it was the most boring film of the festival so far for me. I was absolutely fuming throughout. I was angry because I thought, so we reviewed After Sun a few weeks ago, which is a film which people seem, which very rooted in a relationship, in the content of a relationship that's depicted on screen, and people who like it generally say it reminds them of a holiday they took with their dad. You know, regular listeners of this show will know that we don't think that's a very good reason to like a movie. But yeah, this film also seemed to be rooted in just kind of trying to like dwell on a relationship. Obviously, I like Roma. I like, you know, films about intimacy and people, but yeah, this felt shapeless. There were loads of you know, like it felt like it could just go on forever. There was no real reason for it to start and end where it did. There was a lot of tell rather than show. People just rolling up and saying, "Oh, this thing has just happened," off screen.
Your friend's just killed himself. Goodbye.
Yeah, and then just like leaving us with this, what in another director's hands might be a sort of devastating kind of abyss around some new devastating, some new like dark information, but actually was just kind of like banal. Yeah, so I felt it was just generally indulgent of a kind of anxious, yearning vibe. Like, obviously there are loads of people who are like this. There are loads of men who kind of hanker after unavailable women who hover around hankering men. You know, there are these kind of like irritating sex, you know, like irritating dynamics.
But there's an excess of longings that interact.
Yeah,
in this
and this
film,
longing is so self-conscious. I mean, that you know, he's seen reading the book Lover's Discourse by Roland Barthes, which that particularly pissed me off as a kind of.
I didn't mind that, and I actually loved the printed edition that they showed. But,
well, that's extremely neither here nor there. No, I thought it was weirdly heavy-handed and lacking in punctuation. It sort of seemed to drift. Structurally, it seemed to drift, and yet it had these vignettes that were extremely like hammering the point home. There's a bit towards the end, right at the end, where you know, various parallels have been made between him and his father, and then there's a shot of him sat at a chair, and then the camera goes up into the sky. And then the camera comes down, and it's his father sitting where he was. This is the final shot of the film. This is like
while it's snowing.
This is like something. Yeah, while it's snowing. Yeah. This is like something you might do sort of A-level film studies, like to try and sort of show that, you know, there's a similarity between two characters. It's really
already
really embarrassing.
That's already present.
Exactly.
The film's already established.
The film should have faith in its own subtlety to convey that. Unfortunately. Yeah, at various points. I mean, there are these kind of jokes about. I mean, there was lots of sort of knowing laughter in the audience. There was no real actual kind of jokes, but there were this bit where he asks a Korean to give him any word in Korean, and the guy says "sarang," it means love, and then he's like, but in Uyghur it means fool. And
yeah, it's very
just like,
knowing.
It's so heavy-handed, so twee, and just left a horrible taste in my mouth. And it just looked like shit. I thought the color was rubbish. I thought the compositions were rubbish. I thought it was much better than it was because it doesn't look like a conventional Hollywood
I don't even know
film.
it felt very low energy.
It
It felt like it was trying like a Chinese effort, as it were, and it was very, very, very overproduced, this film, in a sense. So I mean that from the production side. So when the film begins, there's almost this kind of parodic film before the film, which is watching the production company idents, and they go on and on and on.
It's a very avant-garde reading. I like it.
It is, and I think it's this interesting thing where you realise that maybe it's too many cooks spoiled the broth in a way with this film, because you can see.
You think it was decided by committee? That's quite bold.
No, I'm not making that claim. I mean, maybe I will, but I think there's a sense of this film trying to basically to ride on the kind of middle-brow successes of something like Drive My Car, and tonally the film feels like it's reaching for the same things. You know how Drive My Car ends with the visit to the girls' village, which is in the snow. And this film also ends with a shot in the snow, a meaningful encounter in the snow. I think there's a lot of allusions
the attempt to inject gravitas into something using these like
by changing the weather. It's very lazy. I think I'm kind of reminded of Henry James talking about Tolstoy in 19th century literature. Loose baggy monsters, and I think this is a loose baggy monster. But yeah, that being said, there is there's the imprint again. There's a silhouette maybe of the restrained Liu Shang in this film, and often that's with these sort of slightly surreal, exaggerated, inauthentic performances, which you get in, say, Grain and Ear and Tang Poetry and Dumoulin River to an extent. And you have these moments of kind of weirdness and kind of, but then there's naturalism as well. It tries to exist at different tonal registers. But there's still I found it very charming in some ways. Like I like the idea, the story of a food writer. I think it's quite interesting. But yeah, it was kind of grasping for profundities that weren't really earned, and I think it was kind of like a pick and mix of various of Taiwanese new wave. So you had this shot where he goes to this kind of ruined with the girl ruined orphanage where he isn't aware. A bit dramatic irony, but he's not aware that she was an orphan there.
Reminded me of the beautiful what you're about to say as well.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of was.
The Boys of Feng Kui by Hu Shaoxian. Amazing scene in a blasted out.
But the boys look out over the city from this kind of third or fourth floor of this abandoned parking lot, basically, and it's this moment where they drink in the immensity of this city, kind of dwarfed and alienated by it. It's also a moment of real transcendence, and this film, it kind of has one of those, but it does that twice. You see the framing of an outside twice, and maybe even 3 times, but it's looking out onto some boats, and it's not entirely clear. It's doing the same thing, but there was none of the legwork done to earn that moment of profundity in a way. So I think it was a loose baggy monster. It was kind of disappointing in a lot of ways because I was really. Of all films, I was most excited to see this new Liu Shang.
Oh, really?
Because I've been on such like a Liu Shang bender at the moment. And I was like, I'm really interested in his method of working, but I haven't seen his most recent cluster of films, and so I suppose he's kind of.
They're probably likely to be quite similar to this.
I should think so. I don't think this is like a dramatic formal break with his. I think it's just been an accumulation, but I think particularly, it's more of an invocation. Like, don't take our Ralph's loathing and my mid feelings about this film as an invocation against watching Liu Shang, but watch Grain and Ear, watch like Tongue Poetry, and watch early Liu Shang. And
I was also not as much of a fan of what I saw of Grain and Ear, but I would no doubt be admonished by Owen for not watching the full
because
thing.
The amazing thing about Grain and Ear, which I will celebrate, is the end of the whole film is shot in this very staid, static way. It's kind of sublimated anomic feeling of the or Q, the main character. When she breaks free from this, the camera then moves, and it has this over-the-shoulder tracking shot that lasts about 5 minutes as she just walks away from the town and into the fields.
Oh, you did send this shot. It looked amazing. Yeah,
it's absolutely extraordinary because you've had this whole film up until that point purely static, and then to have this release.
But that shows a director who understands form, and what's weird is
he claims he doesn't.
But what's weird about the artists don't have a clue about their own art, but very often. But what's weird about this film is that the formal or the devices on this occasion are way more clumsy, and the most obvious one being and more related to content. The most obvious one being the whole film. You're told about this tower that doesn't cast any shadows, mainly because it's cloudy all the time. Although that's not a stated reason; it's some magic thing. And then there's a moment where it appears that the characters themselves are not casting shadows suddenly.
The fantastical kind of creeps in for no. It's not.
It doesn't transcend in the way that perhaps the ending of L'Humanité.
Well, that they point it out. Whereas a Vera Sathical wouldn't have pointed that out.
Yeah, Dumont wouldn't point it out.
Yeah, they would just not have shadows, and maybe the viewer would notice, or maybe they wouldn't, or it'd be on the edge of perception. I think that's the difference here. It's like, oh, I've done this clever thing. By the way, the character's going to tell you you this is happening, just in case you miss it, because it's
same with the ending with the dead. Yeah,
so
a great shame.
But it has an amazing dinner scene, and I think George sourced there's a karaoke moment when they karaoke their friend in Paris down the phone. And it's the Beijing Olympics opening theme song, and it's a great bit of like intertextuality between mass culture and the film. I thought that was really
fans
amazing.
Fans
of opening
sort
songs.
of trivia will be overjoyed. I was not.
It's a trivialist film, a trivial film for trivialists.
Yes, I was maybe something else, but I've forgotten. So let's move on.
Okay, let's go.
Emily Atef appeared in. The only other thing I was going to say was just that it reminded me most of Hong Sang-soo, whose new film we will see and whose work I've been looking at in preparation for.
I disagree with that, but maybe we can talk about that after we watch Hong Sang-soo, because it didn't feel Hong Sang-soo-ish really at all to me, apart from characters having conversations. But it felt like Ho Shen.
Characters having conversations is a huge factor
of most films. Yeah.
No, but the indulgence, the need for characters to sort of something that Roma, and we can talk. Maybe we need to do another Roma episode where we talk about why exactly it is that Roma does so many things that seem like they would be the exact wrong thing to do,
but does them correctly.
But does them correctly and does them cinematically. Because when Hong Sang-soo does them, and when this director in this instance Liu Zhang does them,
Hong Sang-soo is not a good filmmaker. So end of.